Can,
Hello?
can you start off by introducing yourself? And I also want to ask, I've heard you call brand development a scientific art. So thinking about your journey, when do you think intuition should lead and when should data and discipline step in to make sure great ideas actually survive inside an organization?
Well, that's great. I'm going to answer both those questions at the same time. I came out of a purely creative background. I was a creative director in agencies in New York at some of the biggest ones. And it became clear after a while that everybody was looking at the tip of the iceberg. Everybody just wanted to dance on the stage. But without really solid underpinnings behind the story you want to tell, uh, you're going to be telling the wrong story. Ernest Hemingway said, "What did he say?" He said, um, "The goal of a writer, at least the kind of writer that he was, is to understand the complexity of it all and say it very simply." And in my opinion, the creative side of the agency spent most of their time, our time, focusing on the creative side, which is fun, without really paying attention to the strategic side that underpins it. So I began to divide my time more and more between the two. Um, and in the end, for the past 15 years or so, I've had my own brand development consultancy, which really focuses on the strategic basis for building a brand before you can move on to the creative side of it, before you should move on to the creative side of it.
So what you're talking about here are, constraints and kind of providing that level of guidance. And so constraints are often kind of framed as creative fuel. I'm just curious which ones you think, and you've talked already about the strategy, but which ones do you think generally make the work better and which are, constraints you think teams should push back on?
I think there's two kinds of constraints. One of them is a gift, and that's the deadline. Because if you don't have a deadline, it goes on and on. Um, Another kind of constraint resolves around goals and objectives. A mentor I had a long time ago taught me a formula, and the formula is that relevant times distinctive equals effective in your communications. And he said, think of it as multiplication. So if your creative is one, if you've really nailed the creative, but your relevance to the target audience or target market is zero, the net result is zero. Um, and so you really have to pay attention to, but it's like an architect, right? And I used to hire writers who were studying to be architects or who were fans of architects, because an architect is constrained by the landscape, by the client's objectives, what it is they want to achieve, the materials they work with. But that doesn't mean they can't be creative. In fact, they're some of the most creative people out there, but they understand the value of the constraints. I'd say the other constraint, and this is a negative constraint, is assumptions, really. Very often you have clients, but also creatives who make assumptions about the target audience or assumptions about the product that sound good, that seem intuitive, but aren't right. So I would always encourage people to challenge the assumptions that are underpinning the work they're about to do.
Along those same lines, I mean, I guess, thinking about constraints, I guess you could argue process is also constrained in terms of, it's supposed to help creativity, but for some teams it becomes the enemy. I mean, what would you say is that right structure that creative teams need to do their best work?
Well, I would say rule number one is remember that the client is not your enemy. It's always fun as a creative behind the scenes to talk about the client and make fun about the client, make fun of the client. But the truth is that if the client doesn't succeed, you don't succeed. So I have always believed that it's very important. And when I talk about the client, I'm not talking about the entire organization. I'm not talking about the brand. I'm talking about the individual or the small team of individuals that you're working with. So I've always felt it's very important to be on the same side, um, to bring them in to help you through the process of understanding the product, the brand, the market, and so on. And equally important, to equip them to tell the story through the organization, to help them explain why. This is why I hate spec creative, right? Because spec creative is based on a one-page brief, right? There's no underpinnings to it. And how can you choose an agency or a brand development partner without having the solid understanding that Ernest Hemingway was talking about? It's like trying to paint a house before you've built it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So, build into the process a way that the client can equip them to sell through the organization, not just the creative output, but the story behind the output and how you got there.
I mean, and how much of it is a collaboration with the client versus a agency saying, "Here's what it is," and clients agreeing or disagreeing? I mean, what's your sense about that part of the process?
The, the best trick I've ever learned in this business is to make the client think they came up with the idea. To give them ownership of it. And I'm being a little bit facetious, but to make them feel invested in it in a way that only an owner can feel invested in it. And that way they'll go to the mat for it.
That's great.
And then, Dave, can you share a time when a brand challenge didn't have an obvious creative direction at the beginning? And then how did you and your team go from having a messy beginning to a focused, clear idea?
I can think of a time when we actually had no idea what we were doing. It was a funny situation. It was an online recruiting company in the early days of online recruiting. And they wanted to prepare for a trade show, a big trade show that was some months out. And we said, great, give us the brief. Let's sit down. Tell us, what is your product? And they said, well, we haven't really finished developing it yet. All right. So can you tell us, about what it'll be when it comes? No, we don't want to spill that yet. We basically had nothing to work with. But what we did get to was the idea that what they're working on was going to revolutionize the industry. So instead of building the story about product and benefits, it was about really positioning the brand as an innovator, even before they had finished their innovation. And what we did was we created a whole campaign based around turning the industry upside down. And we created, and I'm not kidding, a booth built upside down. So the floor was up there, the ceiling tiles were down here, the furniture was bolted to the ceiling, the artwork was upside down. It was great. And people would come in to have their photo taken with it. And of course, they walked out with the idea that this is really turning things upside down. So while this did not convey the message of what the product is or was, it primed the audience for understanding the position so that they were more receptive to it when the time came.
That's really cool. On this whole subject of creativity, I guess I'd be curious what you think does hold brands back from being their most creative, and what can leaders do to try to address that?
I would come back to the front end. The problem isn't holding people back. The problem is not holding people back. And I know that sounds like a very bad thing for a creative to say, because I consider myself really devoted to the creative process. But it comes back to those constraints. I mean, imagine playing football without sidelines and end zones. The old saying, if you don't have a goal, any road will take you there. So it's making sure everyone on your creative team, but also in the client organization, is on board for where you're going. Nothing wastes more time and money than creative spent going in the wrong direction. So early on, I would say build that into the process.
Okay, that makes sense. One of the things I want to get your thoughts on is AI. I mean, it's all the buzz. Everybody's talking about it, a lot of noise around it, particularly when it is related to creativity and using AI for creativity. I'm just curious, where do you think AI is genuinely helping creative development now, and where do you think leaders really need to be more cautious?
Well, my first thought was we must kill it with fire because it's coming for our jobs. But we can't do that. I was involved in this business back when the transition was made from um, from linear editing. That is, well, it's like let's see, how can I explain this? Where everything is assembled bit by bit, working with tape. They used to the
Hmm.
old editors used to keep engineers used to keep pieces of audio tape around their neck. To what we have now, where you can just move and change things. It's a whole different way of thinking. The people who were in the industry at that time did not adapt to the new technology, and they died. So I have to swallow my pride a little bit and understand that there are things that AI can do that I can't do. I was looking for a name for a podcast a couple of weeks ago, and I was kind of at my wit's end. So I
Hmm.
said, all right, I'm going to do it. And I used ChatGPT, which I asked to come up with 10 names, and they're great. And it killed me a little bit. But ChatGPT didn't know which of the 10 names was right. I
Hmm.
knew that. I knew that because I knew my target audience. I understood the creative process. So I understood at that point that it could be a really valuable tool. You can ask it to come up with creative ideas.
Hmm.
I once had a writer ask me, Dave, if I use a thesaurus, is that cheating? No, it's not cheating in this to use AI, because remember, our goal is not artistic purity. Our goal is effective communication of a message and a story with a specific objective.
Hmm.
So if the tool can help you, by all means do it, providing you respect the sources that AI is using.
And then, if a brand or marketing leader took just one action after listening to this conversation today, what should they try, stop, or rethink for this quarter?
Well, again, it comes back to the same story. You know what they say, garbage in, garbage out, right? If you don't do the work up front, which can be tedious at times, um, you're going to go in the wrong direction. You're going to waste money. I once had a client, if you have time for one more quick anecdote, I had a
Absolutely.
client, this is back in the early days of music streaming, and they wanted to introduce a new music streaming service. And their story was going to be, now you don't have to own records. Now you can get all of your records. Now you can get rid of all of your records because everything that you want to listen to, you just put on your headphones or put on the stereo and you can call it down. And we said, something doesn't feel right about this. Do we know that's what people want? Because people at that point were buying CDs. So we did some focus research. And what we found out at that time was people, especially this target market, hated the idea, because the idea that they were paying for something that they couldn't own just felt very, very, very wrong to them. They said, wait, if I stop paying, all of my music goes away. And we said, yes, but for the price of one CD a month, you have all the music in the world. They didn't buy it. If we hadn't done that, we would have just spent a lot of money and a lot of time chasing in the wrong direction.
Then, John, do you have any more questions for Dave?
I guess my last thing would be, what would be, again, thinking of the wisdom of the ages, what would be sort of like the one thing you tell folks that are, charged with driving business ahead? What should they do from an inspiration standpoint?
From an inspiration standpoint, I would say, I'm talking about on the creative side now, don't be afraid to look stupid.
Mm.
Um, you know, they say there are no stupid ideas. That's not true. There are lots of stupid ideas. But to get to the good idea, a lot of times you have to go through a lot of stupid ideas, and you have to respect people who have great imaginations who you want in this business. But you have to have the wisdom, and that's where creative directors come in to know the good ideas from bad ideas.
Great. Well, thank you.
My
Yes.
pleasure.
Thank you for coming on today, Dave. And thank you guys all for tuning in. As always, stay tuned for next month's episode of Radical Thoughts on Innovation. If you have any questions or takeaways, please drop them below in the comments. Thank you guys.